Hello, hello. Welcome to D&D Epic History. That's a working title. You got any better ideas, Jesse?
For the moment, epic history seems to be a good one. We'll probably end up ripping off some sort of time bandits motif later on, I'm sure. But well, what's the old saying? If you borrow from multiple sources, it's not really stealing; it's just homage.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see what works and what I can get the domain for. So today we're going to be making our characters using D&D Beyond. We'll take turns rolling them up in there. So let's get stuck right in. The concept is that we will be making famous characters from history. So I have gone with Lord George Byron.
It's
Who are
interesting to
you
see
making?
all the choices you had there before. I will be making Nikola Tesla. We've both taken some interesting choices, especially for their historical significance. Most of it, though, I think is we went with figures that we enjoyed the histories of personally within the recent-ish history of the last 200 years. Um, you had some interesting reasons around picking Lord Byron. What was the main draw for you to him?
Well, I'm a big fan of bards. I think bards are enormously fun to play. And Byron is just a character and a fucking half. So mad, bad, and dangerous to know. um, he was a lord at 10. His dad was considered genuinely quite mad and left a slew of ex-wives and yeah, bankrupt estates behind him. And Lord Byron followed suit pretty well, sleeping with, sort of in Rasputin fashion, most people's wives, and ending up pretty much getting kicked out of England with the shame of everything. Um, Beautiful poet, symbolized the romantic movement, but was very popular and witty. Um, and yeah, ended up going off to Armenia, Italy, and then Greece, exploring the world, getting involved in other people's politics. Was a good swimmer, a boxer, and yeah, yeah, had the occasional duel
Yeah,
with dueling pistols when he insulted someone, or more likely slept with their wife. Yeah, there's just a lot of history there. He's a great fucking character.
yeah, like you were saying, very symbolic of the gentleman poet of yesteryear.
Yeah, and there literally is the term Byronic hero, which is this, tragically over romantic mess of a man, which I definitely can relate to.
That's the great thing about D&D. It's that everything we play, uh, maybe not for everybody, but for me, this has been the case. Everything you play has just been a different aspect of some element of your personality or things you enjoy. And it's interesting to see how, even with historical parallels, you can still, just like that, you can find a parallel to something else in your own life.
I'm not saying this is me, but there may be a reason why I chose it. So I don't know with these, Jesse. I just always click them all on and then decide later whether it's something I want. I can't
well,
imagine we use Rick and Morty content, although it does seem somewhat fitting.
well, I mean, if the shoe fits, I know with other D&D streams, they'll take and they'll cherry pick spells from other modules. I can't remember which one it was specifically. I think it was Critical Role. They had borrowed something from uh, the Adventure Zone. No, it's the one run by Jeremy Crawford. It has its own module and content released, and one of them is very hilarious. It's something to do with giving a corporate speech to give temporary hit points to people. I've never seen them use it again, but for that one session, it was a funny little. Oh yes, my character, the priestly dude, is going to do a rousing speech about company standards, and it's just like what?
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Okay, I will check that out. So yeah, I'll do. I won't go too off the track, but I'll keep them all on just in case anything exciting comes up as we go through. I think
Acquisitions
otherwise
Incorporated.
the
That's what I was
Acquisitions
thinking of.
Incorporated. That's the one. Yeah,
That's the
I've heard
one.
great things
Yep.
about them. So we're going for historical figures, but I don't want to limit us to humans. This world we're going for is, low magic. I think a lot of magic will be described by tech, but there's the idea that maybe there was some magic that didn't make it to the historical footnotes.
Yeah. So we're probably not likely to see any sort of healing potions or strictly magical themed items, but we'll certainly find some colorful ways to keep the mechanics into play whilst also
Yeah.
preserving that theme we're going for.
And so likewise, I don't want to limit everyone to have to play a human. I think we can reskin one of the other races if it feels appropriate. So
yeah.
I've been thinking about this, and there's a few options. Scourge Asima is an interesting one because it's sort of like for this dark, brooding guy. It adds to his charisma. Gives himself the ability to damage everything, which Lord Byron certainly did in his life around him.
I mean, and if I remember that feature correctly, it also damages yourself. So
yes, it seemed appropriate.
Yeah, and for a figure like Lord Byron, who's tragic, as you said, that does certainly seem to fit the theme of a Byronic figure.
So there's that. There's also, maybe something like a half elf can't be charmed or sleep, which certainly he wasn't a fan of oversleeping. Bit of charisma, bit of wisdom, bit of intelligence. I was even looking at like reskinning a Tabashi because I think with using his cat claws as his boxing skills.
Yeah.
I'm sort of torn between the Scourge Asima and the Wanti.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why I like Wanti, because of animal friendship and suggestion to certain animals. And the reason for that is because Byron was famously like madly in love with having a menagerie of loads and loads of pets. And have you heard the story about the bear?
I believe you've told me that one several times, but tell it again for listeners.
So he wasn't allowed to bring his favourite dog as a big Newfoundland, the big black dogs that swim.
Yeah.
In Botswana, he wasn't allowed to bring it to university, and he was very, very upset about this. But he consulted all the laws and bylaws and confirmed that that was indeed against the rules. However, they didn't mention anything about bears, and so he purchased one from a local travelling circus and had it walk around with him, this trained bear.
Definitely one to utilize the word of the law against the law.
And then I think, poison immunity, that is fitting of a man that drank 4 bottles of claret a day.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the scholar's drink of choice, wasn't it? And still is, if you ask some. Alcohol and liquor seems to go hand in hand with being the scholar's choice.
So I'm leaning there, just partly because, as funny as it would be for the Scourge Asima Lord Byron to hurt himself and everyone around him, I'm kind of trying to tilt towards as low magic as possible for this build.
Yeah.
So yes.
Having a look there. Yeah, it seems to build into some of those themes that you were mentioning with Lord Byron. With seeing at night, we could reskin that however we want.
I would just maybe lose it and say he doesn't have dark vision, right?
Yeah. Like we said, we're working from a chassis here. So we're probably going to take some elements off and replate it elsewhere as we go.
Here's one. Poison spray as a cantrip. How would we reskin that for Lord Byron?
Well, because it's within close range, that could be his boxer's punch, where he does hit, and it could be a bludgeoning damage thing. And it's just a matter of he's throwing out these really well-honed punches. Can the other person maintain their form as he kind of knocks them off poise?
Could be, although I am planning on making him a monk, so I think he'll have plenty of that. What if, you know that ridiculous thing where someone spits their water out when someone says something outrageous?
Yes, yes.
He's
The
going to do that with hard liquor in their eyes.
oh god, oh dear.
Doesn't really seem very fitting for a lord. We might not be able to use that too often, but we'll try.
It's the juxtaposition from his normal savvy debonair appeal to this uh, straight man to the crazy person motif, constantly
Right.
shocked at all the craziness that's happening around him.
So I think we'll nerf Dark Vision. We'll sparsely use innate spell casting, but I'm okay with him being resistant to spells. It works well as a support bard as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're pretty good otherwise.
Excellent work. All right, so next up is the class. You've already mentioned what you think of Lord Byron as the titular poet of his time, or the bard, so seems like a fairly out-and-out, cut-and-dry choice.
Yes, I think so. Although I am going to go for multi-class because it's always fun to do, especially with a historically legendary figure such as this.
All right. You were mentioning you want to go monk as well.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
I don't know if we've mentioned it for the listeners yet, but we intend to take these up to a relatively high tier of play, and we're hoping to start at around level 12. So we've got loads of room to mess around with what sort of build we want to make.
We're starting level 12 then. So if we go level 8 bard, that's going to give us a lot of goodies. So you can see down here. Yeah, otherwise I'd have to push it up to 10, which would only give me... Oh, there's a good thing to get at level 10 where you get a secret of a magic spell from another class. But for now, I'm quite happy with everything I'd get here. The main thing with bards is choosing your college, and I've gone with the College of Glamour.
An interesting choice. For those who don't know the College of Glamour, it functions on a lot of levels as a charm class, frightening and attracting those around them as one of the things they can do naturally. Quite a fitting little niche for Lord Byron, considering his thematic stylization we're going for here. Interesting choice, man. What sort of proficiencies are we thinking of loading up, Lord Byron? As a bard, you've got an awful lot of musical choices and skills to pick from.
Sure, which barely matters as long as you don't pick the bagpipes.
That's an interesting point. Did Lord Byron ever end up traveling north to Scotland?
Yes, yeah, he actually grew up in Scotland. He's, I guess, half Scottish. So he did spend some time there.
Dare I
Are you
say?
going to suggest I give him the bagpipes?
Or dare I say it? I think so.
All right. And then as for his skills, I think he's going to be, classic people person, right? Professional socializer,
Yeah.
insight, persuasion.
And the good thing about bards is you never really fail at anything you do, no matter what.
Skills are just off the chart, right? It's +7 to almost everything.
Something like that, yes. If those who haven't played Bard before are interested, Bards get a feature at second level called Jack of all Trades, which means if you're not skilled in it, add half your relevant attribute bonus anyway. So if you're not knowledgeable in religion, well, you are now.
I remember reading somewhere that there was no point in having performance as a skill as a bard because of these. You're going to win on your performance checks anyway.
Well, there is an argument to be made for that. Performance is your cover-all trait. Basically, it's like having a martial weapon proficiency or a simple weapon proficiency. You can have specific proficiencies in rapiers or short swords, or you can have proficiencies in performance, which is your cover-all. If you want to have all your bases covered, go for performance. But if you want to just have a specific excellence at something, then go for a specific proficiency like musical instruments.
If it was min-maxing, I'd go different, but now I think it's more important to be true to what I've read about the character.
Yeah, and in some instances with your tools, your DM might decide to apply a different attribute bonus to the skill you're using. So for instance, you could have a dexterity check with your flute tool use. And in some
Okay.
cases, that may be a stronger pick for some. But all right. I think the next interesting thing for you, May, is your expertise. Now, this is where we show where Lord Byron's real colours come shining through.
Because this doubles the ability, right?
That's right. So you basically guaranteed, well, you're raising your chances of success by at least 20% in some cases.
So I figured I'd go for insight and persuasion. Like him holding court, him being a peer from the age of 10, him managing to convince everyone to sleep with him, be they married or not. I think he's good at reading and manipulating people.
Definitely some of the skills he's shown to have throughout history.
Yeah, and you know, he at the end of the day, he wasn't a musician, just was very good with the word. However, I think, to be honest, given that he's got the College of Glamour, I'm going to flavour that spell as him doing poetry. So I don't need to just use it as a role. It will actually be he recites a poem and everyone falls in line.
Well, there's something interesting I'm spying there. Enthralling performance. Let's have a quick read through that if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you charge a performance with seductive fey magic. I can definitely see poetry. It even says in the first line by reciting a poem for at least a minute. That is beautiful. I think that fits in definitely with the theme you were working towards.
Right.
Yeah, and I like that. Once you use the feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So invested in his performance is Lord Byron that he takes a little sabbatical after every performance just to refresh the vigors.
And by the sabbatical, you mean heavy drinking sessions.
Of course. And since we've gone with Yonti, he's never quite. He's one of those horrifically wonderful souls who drink so heavily that the next day they wake up and they have no hangover whatsoever.
There's horrific stories of Christopher Hitchens famously, you know, would take someone out drinking all night long and they'd be just wrecked and he'd have to carry them home. And then they're like, oh, what are you up to now? And he's like, oh, I've got to go write an article for the paper tomorrow. Catch you in the morning. And he'd be up in the morning reading his own work that he'd stayed up late into the night working on.
Glorious.
Likewise, this one will bardic inspiration my team, making them 5 temporary hit points, which is a nice bardic ability as a support bard.
Very interesting. I like that it mentions how it gives you a glorious appearance, and I can almost envisage Lord Byron wrapping himself in his the robes or clothes he wore when his travels internationally, and just putting himself in that national hero motif.
Handsome Lord. So, yeah, I will go for. We can always come back and change these, but let's go for a bit of strength as a boxer and a bit of wisdom.
You did mention you were going for a monk as a multi-class option earlier, didn't you?
Yeah.
If that's the case, you could potentially go for dexterity, though monks, I believe, can use strength or dexterity.
Well, I think I'm just going to max out my dexterity anyway. So we'll come back to this.
Yeah. The rest of these features we see are fairly stock standard for your bard. I believe font of inspiration is you can inspire yourself. No, I stand corrected.
A short rest is enough to regain bardic inspiration, which is pretty amazing given that my bardic inspiration gives everyone in my team 5 hit points. So.
Yep.
And then Mantle of Majesty, I make others want to serve me. As a bonus action, I can cast Command without using a spell slot with my unearthly beauty for 1 minute.
All I can picture in my mind is all the women Lord Byron has wooed over his long and sordid history, regaling them with poems by the backyards of a nobleman or so-and-so's house. I'm sure he was unearthly beautiful to some.
And then let's go for more wisdom. And the reason I'm not maxing out dexterity is because I've already rolled, and I rolled an ungodly high number, and I'm going to put that in my dexterity, and I'll be fine. And plus, I think I get dexterity from my, is it wantiness or something? Anyway.
Intelligence and charisma, I believe, for Yon too.
Okay, fair enough. Before I go into monkeying around, shall I switch it back to you and you go through your character creation?
That sounds good to me, mate.
Cool.
I'll open up my Dungeons and Dragons and have a quick build. Where's that share screen button? There we go.
Easier to find when I stop.
There we go. So, I don't have as much on my D&D Beyond, but where I don't have it, I'll happily show viewers or listeners how to work around some of those issues. So we're going to go with
Nice.
a standard array here. And like my friend before, I'm going to enable all this content. No, we're not sure how we're going to be progressing our characters, but most of the time we tend to go with milestone, as it seems to be the easier way for a DM to narrate and traverse through stories without having to interrupt their own pacing too much, to accommodate for their players deciding to spend 20 years killing rats. An interesting Reddit feed I saw mentioned how if you spent 20 in-game years killing 6 rats per day, that would be enough to get you up to level 20. Interesting theory.
You know, if you focus really hard on being a sushi chef, you'll get amazingly good at it. So I can buy that.
Yeah, it's the rule of 10,000 hours, isn't it?
Quite.
All right. Now let's get a little bit of art up for our character. Now I'm going for the older Nikola Tesla, and we have some stylized art we can use later on. Tesla's one of those figures who's become more popular
There are
in
some
more modern
interesting
history.
options there.
Now, for where we're sitting in our pacing here, I'm thinking of having a more older version of it. For those who don't know, Tesla's one of those figures who he kind of has some interesting quirks. One of which was his love of pigeons. And those who are familiar with characters from games like Team Fortress 2 might remember that the Doctor had doves and pigeons around called Archimedes, whatnot, in the delightful trailer for the medic. We see the pigeon in the Brute's chest. I might be butchering that name. Characters like that, with their German and other such accents, could be said to be inspired loosely by Tesla. Now, we've got the name, we've got the art. Let's go on to race. Next. Now, I had to think about this one for a while. Tesla is a odd fellow. He's known for his photographic memory, his obsessive behaviors, and is particularly obsessed with the number 3. But all that doesn't quite create a picture of a racial chassis or skeleton I can frame around him. So what I'm thinking is I could go with either a human variant and pick up a feat that might play into his peculiar eccentricities, or I could go with the Gith and further emphasize how he's a little bizarre. And there are some historical buffs who will tell you of his peculiar notions towards aliens existing and other such theories. And the Gith are known as these alien entities in the D&D lore, so they could be an excellent trapping for it.
Many a genius goes down this path, right? You had Young was obsessed with the spirit realm. Newton spent half of his career trying to make alchemy work. But what is a Gith? I'm quite confused.
Okay. So a Gith are from a older generation of D&D. I believe they first popped up in 2nd edition. Don't quote me on that because I could very, very well be wrong. We all know, or some of us might know, of the octopus-faced illithids, the peculiar creatures that eat brains. They're lauded and shown off in the later seasons of Stranger Things. Spoiler warning there, sorry about that. The Gith were their slaves. An awkward and interesting little theory, history from the lore. We have the 2 sub-races, the Gith Yankee and the Gith Zerai. Now this represents a racial split. The Gith Yankee were led by a figure with the last name of that. Please don't quote me on that one. All I know is they are fundamentally 2 opposing philosophies that now dwell in the astral plane. The Gith Yankee being led by a Lich Queen, who sends out her warriors on dragons with their silver swords, and the Gith Zerai, who kind of fill in this monk-like role, where they try and focus and hone their mental prowess. The common factor between both of them is that they are united against their former oppressors, the Illithids. That doesn't mean they're friendly to everyone else, though. If you run a game of D&D and have a Githyanki coming towards your way, don't expect it to be friendly. They've picked up the worst traits of their oppressors and have become those in tow. The Githzerai, however, you might find them to be more friendly, if somewhat standoffish.
I like the idea of a race with a history of oppression. It's plays itself into Tesla's story somewhat, right?
It does. He's not he's not had the best of lives, and he's unfortunately lived through rather painful personal experiences. But looking through some of the features of the Gith, I don't think it quite matches with the theme. With the Githyanki, they have this focus on weaponry and psionics, and the Githzeroi have this reflection focus where they have advantages against being frightened and maintaining their mental fortitude in addition to psionics. So while I think their chassis, the skeleton of them, sounds nice with their lore drapings, I think I might have to go with the basic human or the variant. So plus,
what feat were you thinking of?
well, some sources will talk about how Nikola Tesla has photographic memory. So I'm thinking of doing the DM's Bane, which is keen mind. Now, unfortunately, I don't have access to it on here. So what I will do is at a later date, I'll copy it over from one of my books into the very handy homebrew creations where you are able to, in a private setting, create your own feats and copy them
Another
across.
thing we can do, because I've paid for the feats, is put the character in a campaign, give me control of it, let me edit it, and then throw it back your way. Little tip there.
Yeah. So
it's a bit of a
excellent
pain,
idea.
but that's why they encourage you to pay.
Yeah. Now, I have to choose 2 different ability scores of my choice to increase by 1. Intelligence will be my first one for obvious reasons. He's not associated with the steampunk revolution without good reason. However, for my second one, just listing through some things we know, if you look at any picture of Nikola Tesla, you'll know he's a rather skinny, gaunt man, especially in his later years. So I'm going to slide right past Constitution because I don't think that's the thing he would have in oodles. Same with strength and wisdom. The man was not known for handling money, and he didn't learn from experience, in spite of his photographic memory. So that leaves me with 2.
I'm sensing a very sad figure here. You're going to pump intelligence.
Well, there is some good elements to it. He was a promoter of his products, and he was known to try and hawk his goods amongst celebrities. So you can't do that without a certain amount of social ability. So I'm going to pop that second one into charisma.
Nice.
Yeah. Now for my human variant, we get a free skill. I'm thinking, it's hard to pick which one exactly works into the theme, but in lieu of saying technological proficiency, I'm going to put Arcana. As the saying goes, great magics and great technologies are in basically the same. I'm paraphrasing heavily. This is not the quote. Please don't quote me on this.
If you go back far enough in time, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between tech and magic, I think is
thank you, Chris,
another failure at quoting the thing.
A little closer than where I was, I think. I'm not going to worry too much about languages at this point. He spoke Siberian and English fluently enough, and we can play into that when we get into our game.
Yeah, so. Likewise for Byron. I figure it's easy to customize the languages, so we'll just add them as we go along. And we'll say he's good at languages and quick to pick up an extra one here and there.
Yeah. Now, that brings us on to classes. Now, as you can look through this range, you'll probably notice that one is missing, and that's the one from Eberron, the Artificer, which is my pick for D&D 5th edition. But because I don't have that, I don't want to keep you holding on and not looking. What we're going to do is we're going to build him as if he was a wizard, because there are some interesting builds you can do around that. So just bear in mind this will be the template, but I plan to shift him over to an Artificer at some point. And I'll just talk through the process of how you might create a wizard variant of Tesla. Now, I'm going to bump him up all the way to level 12. I don't want him to be too mad. I think Tesla focuses well on just being very focused on his one thing. He was often quoted as talking about how he didn't have time for a wife or a woman because he said it distracted from his career all too much. He said some interesting things, as all large figures throughout history are known to be strung up by their worst statements. Uh, Tesla, in turn, is not quoted as saying the best things about women, but I'm not going to hold that against him just yet.
So he gave all for his career, which famously didn't go so well.
Exactly. So he didn't really have any excuses by the end of it, but
There's a lesson for us all there.
exactly. Don't use your career as a excuse for your life. Now, I would say history is one thing he had a decent enough handle on, but in that same turn of thought, I'll mainly rely on that as a means of reflecting how he can remember things so well. I don't think he was a particularly professed lover of history, and he certainly made many mistakes repeating them, which you'd have to imagine must be horrible to have a photographic memory and to run through scenarios and go, I'm repeating this exact same thing.
I don't imagine he slept particularly well either.
No, no. He was famous for dodging the hospital and led to his death in the end, as he had been diagnosed with a coronoid artery issue, and he infamously would avoid the doctor just so he could keep working. The sort of person to burn the candle at both ends, this figure. So we have our proficiencies, spellcasting, and we have a sequence of ability scores. Now, the meat and bones here will be the arcane tradition we go through. Let's see. We have some interesting choices here available. I think one interesting pull, since we're doing a somewhat science fiction themed thing here, is to go with chronergy or time control magic.
Nice.
It works into our theme of time displacement and how we're traveling through time in a time bandit-esque fashion. So why not? Let's have a look at some of these features. Chronal shift. Magically exert limited control over the flow of time around a creature using a reaction. Okay, you can use it twice and you expend its uses. I think that works in well into a theme of, and we'd conjectured some ideas about Tesla having a poorly made time machine that he didn't quite understand. And I think that kind of works into that theme where he could be playing around with the device to some extent to try and evade an instance of danger or harm, or try and change a scene in a very butterfly effect sort of fashion where he sees the effects of one thing and he wants to change it. And I think this could play into that.
I love the idea of we go through a fight scene and Tesla's just ridiculously good at it and predicts what everyone's going to do, and the other players look at him like, "Have you done this before? Have we been here before?"
Yeah. I mean, that plays into the Doctor Strange aspect of it. I hadn't realized that until now, but I like that. Oh, and there's an interesting
him not telling us, but just being like ridiculously good at things, and us like, "Done it again, Tesla! Bloody!"
Oh, I might actually stick with this chronology build the more I look into it. It also ties into his conspiracy theories. You could imagine that if the man had really lived a lifetime ahead of his own, I mean, he was heralded with creating some of the first wireless inventions, things we now can thank our
Everything.
we can now be thankful for because we have our phones that do the same thing. Be an interesting theory. I'm gonna
just
play
because
with
he's
it.
paranoid doesn't mean they weren't after.
That's it. That's it. All right. First ability score improvement. We've got Keen Mind going on in the background as his intelligence improvement, but I want to really ramp up that intelligence as much as I can. So we'll buff that up some more. I haven't rolled any stats yet, but I'm thinking of doing as a standard array. So
You can't push any of these stats past 20 without magic
correct.
items, right?
That's correct. So with me, I'm thinking of going a standard array of 15, 15, 15, 8, 8, 8, or 13, 13, 13, 12, 12, 12. So we'll say I'm roughly sitting around 14 for intelligence, bringing it up to 15 with keen mind, and that's 17 for this. So at my next ability score improvement, We'll bump it up by 2 once more, and then I'll probably take an intelligence-related feat for my 12th level improvement. And that'll really play into his single focus determination, where he was just so invested into his work and his intellect that he didn't really see much else beyond it. And outside of these two other interesting little features we can play around with, which again just play into that time feature so well, trapping someone in time so that they can't move, incapacitated even. Oh, beautiful. Trapping someone in time, so time machine perhaps has a slight glitch and someone is stuck, frozen in it.
Nice. You can use it equal to your intelligence modifier, which is going to be in many times.
That's it.
I like it. And then, yeah, as a wizard you are. So if you do lightning spells, I can imagine that being Tesla, with the Tesla coil as a weapon, right?
Just so, just so. And here we see this 10th level feature, Arcane Abeyance, freezing a spell in time. I like the idea of playing it off as pulling events from a different element of time. Say wherever we're standing 10,000 years ago had a lightning storm, Tesla, unintentionally or intentionally, we can work that part out in the process of having fleshed out these characters. For those listening, this is a very skeletons process where we're just setting in the bones of our constructions. This definitely plays into that theme quite nicely. I'm glad I did this.
It's a happy coincidence. As I say, it's not set in stone. You're free to change your mind, but
exactly.
It's a pretty cool class.
Now, I don't want to bore people by going through spells at this point in time. Suffice to say, he should have about 18 spells, which is a hefty amount for any spellcaster to have and for any DM to suffer under. For those experienced DMs listening, if there are any, I'm sure you've all had to suffer a encounter being set back by a spellcaster having a magical solution to your problem that you didn't quite realize was available until then.
I thankfully, have, Jesse, many a time.
Thankfully, as all DMs are aware, there's a good way, an easy way to punish them, and that's with water or any sort of light bop on the nose. As we can see, with 50 hit points, Nikola Tesla is going to be quite frail, especially with our tier of play. Most creatures at this level in your standard D&D game are capable of dealing upwards of 30 to 40 points of damage in a single round, so don't expect Tesla to be up front for anything if he can avoid it. I think that runs through the first aspects of this little segment for me quite nicely, so I'm happy with where I've got him so far. Chris, do you want me to toss it back to you?
Yes, mate. I'm torn. I got a problem. So in classic fashion, I rolled for stats, but I rolled a little bit too well, and I'm not sure anyone will believe me. I don't know whether to just go for standard point buy.
Well, I think you rolled for your stats, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was it you roll 4 dice and then you remove the lowest, and then
that's
say
correct.
Those 3 numbers are what you end up with, right?
So
but I rolled, just to let you know, 15, 17, 18, 16, and then 6 and 11. So it just seems okay. The 6 is bad, but that's otherwise a very high roll block.
Still, it does play into some interesting aspects of his character, and I mean, in any instance, when you roll for stats, some will laud it as a means to get a higher than normal stat average. And sure, that can be that, but it's also a good way for a character to, or a player to try and get into the mindscape of this character they made. And there are more than enough stories of 3rd edition players who would create 10 characters just to get the one character that has the stat array they want by doing by doing a rolling. So I think we could argue the semantics of how you got there, or because I don't want to fight the competition, I'd rather have you join me and be awesome in front of me. We've seen what my constitution score is.
I'm going to go for it.
I'll let you have it.
I think the one evidence that I'm not min-maxing here is going to be that I put my constitution as 6.
Oh, I think I remember that. You probably told me that Lord Byron had a rather sordid history with women, didn't he? And that tied into how he passed away, did it not?
he died of a sickness, and he had several STDs. It's not been confirmed that the two are related. I don't want his lawyers coming after me. So.
Let's just say to anyone who's listening that where there's smoke, there's usually fire.
Where it burns, you should see a doctor. So
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm going to go here. His charisma is going to be his main stat. It's going to be ridiculous. He's wise but not intelligent. He's reasonably strong as a fighter, but not crazy. So we'll have some monk skills, but yeah.
We're definitely setting up Byron as this glass cannon figure who he comes in hard and fast. He's got some staying power in terms of he can manipulate the battlefield, but breaks under pressure.
Yeah, and my hope is actually to convince enough people to surround me with Mantle of Charm that they can be my human shield. Some groupies in the front taking the blows, so to speak. And in classic, opposite to Tesla, he will be wise beyond his years, have an understanding of history and men and people and the things that influence them, but make very foolish decisions. And I quite like the idea of him being a glass cannon, but running headfirst into battle regardless.
Yeah, definitely. He was definitely street smart to a strong degree. And I think that comes with experiencing many interesting life experiences. And he had many, many life experiences. And you said he was traveled. Where are some of the places he traveled, mate?
So he wanted to go around Europe, as was common, to do a gap year at the time, and also to flee some of the scandals and debts he owed. But unfortunately, there was the Napoleonic Wars going on, so he ended up in Italy, and then Greece was ultimately where he died. But before that, he had an interesting period in Switzerland, and he was hanging out with Shelley and his wife. So Shelley was a famous poet, and his wife wrote Frankenstein, Mary Shelley.
Oh, interesting. So he certainly rubs shoulders with some of the other more interesting names that we might pick out from history.
Yeah, and famously, they all lived in a house for the worst summer ever. I think there had been some massive volcano that caused it to rain all summer, and they were all stuck in this gloomy old mansion on a lake for 4 months without a single day of sunshine. And that's when they were all challenged to write the scariest piece of horror they could think of. And that's when I think it wasn't Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it was the precursor. The inspiration for it was written in that session, as was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
There's some interesting stories there. And would no, I don't know this one myself, but would you say that Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, did that come from that party as well, or am I thinking of something else?
Might be something else. I haven't heard that one, but I will check. We won't get into this. There'll be plenty of time for his personality, but what I will say is, as a bard, he's going to have taunt, cutting words, hideous laughter, that sort of thing. And so I've just gone through Byron quotes where he's insulting his peers, and I'm going to use actual Byron quotes in order to cast hideous laughter on an enemy. So use the bard's words himself.
That is glorious, mate. That is glorious.
And likewise for his, mantle of inspiration, I'm going to use actual Byron poems. So yeah, I just think it'll be a really fun flavor and play character.
It'll be interesting to see how that all interweaves into the overarching narratives we try and run through. Mate, I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely looking forward to it.
So he's definitely noble. I think the skill given here is nature because of his love of animals. I guess it doesn't matter, but let's say he played chess. And again, we'll rejig all of these languages because this isn't going to be a fantasy setting.
Interesting to note. Byron's well traveled. Was he a polyglot? Did he speak multiple languages, or was he able to get by with his one language of English?
He spoke pretty good Armenian. I think he ended up learning that very quickly and then making the dictionary, English Armenian dictionary, and translating a bunch of famous literary works from there. That's where he gets his famous, lovely clothes you see in this picture.
Ah,
And then, yeah, he did quite well in Italian as well. So, as a lord would have been educated at the time, he would have read the classics in their native tongue. And yeah, I think by the end he would have been speaking 5 languages, I'd guess.
so certainly no pushover and a decent hand when it comes to speaking with those around them. It should come in handy depending on where in our little adventure and escapades we get placed.
Yeah,
Look forward to seeing
if
how
he
it all plays
couldn't
out.
charm his way out of a situation, he tended to just throw money at it. Famously, when he went to Greece, and it is like classic gap year thing where he's like, "I want to help," and they're like, "Cool, what are your fighting skills?" "Oh, okay, you don't really have those." "Well, you have money, and armies need money, so could you give us 6,000 gold, please?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure. Let me just contact my friend and borrow that money, which I've now promised you."
Whoa, it certainly wasn't lacking in material. That's an That'll be an interesting thing to see played up because depending on where we situate ourselves in the timeline, we might find a Byron distance from his pedigree and resources. Very interesting.
Magical. Is lyre the guitar most similar to the guitar?
I believe the lyre is the one you might see in like Asterix and Obelisk, where it's a U-shaped device with strings in between. I think the viol is close. I'll double
Go for
check.
some magical bagpipes, which I will never play. All right, let's look at what we end up with then.
All right.
D&D Beyond, don't let me down.
There we go. So definitely sitting low on the hit point total with 27. Our glass cannon, assuredly made of glass. Be careful, do not touch. Although we still haven't loaded up your other 4 levels from Monk.
Yes, that will help me, won't it? So
Yeah. So we're probably still sitting at about, with Monk's D8, averaging about 5. We're probably going to end up sitting at 47 hit points by the end of it, which is not too shabby. But
it might be worse
definitely.
than that because of this, but we'll see. The other
See.
thing then, I'll just quickly, before I switch back over to you, Jesse, I think Byron famously had a couple of dueling pistols because
Ah,
people kept challenging him, so he found it more convenient to have them to hand.
never go too far without your one-shot pistol, just in case.
So we'll add a couple of those. And famously, he had a walking stick because he had a clubbed foot.
Interesting. Was he the sort of lord who would have a walking stick that was actually a disguised blade?
Exactly that, yeah. So it was a walking stick with a sword inside. So I'm going to rename his rapier, which is very easy to do in D&D Beyond, as his sword stick.
Now, this is a bit of an obscure trivia, but I believe there's actually an item. It's heralded and magical, but it's not really. In D&D, yes, it's a wondrous item called the Veteran's Cane. And when you grasp this walking cane and use a bonus action to speak the command word, it transforms into an ordinary longsword and ceases to be magical. It was uploaded in the Xanathar's Guide to Everything. That might be an interesting little cover, but I think reworking that as a rapier works just fine for our purposes.
Something to earn later, maybe, if I'm a
Indeed.
good Byron. But yeah, he also famously was very macabre, and I think he liked to throw darts at stuffed taxidermies of exotic animals, and he drank wine from skulls that he'd found in the crypt of his mansion.
Oh,
So you can sort of see why he inspired Dracula.
yes. You can definitely pull some sources from that. I can imagine him sitting with Mary Shelley and the rest of their cohort as he discusses over his fine skull that he polished.
I think later on, maybe he'll get a crossbow, which would be good to help him as a yeah, as a glass cannon. But we'll say he picks that up because I can't imagine it's the sort of thing he would have been walking around with. All right, I'll go back over to you.
All right. And there we are. So we left off with the levels and whatnot. So we're going to jump into abilities. Now I said I'm going to go for the standard array. But what I meant by that was point buy, because with point buy you
Yeah,
can
standard array
eventually
gets really
generate
annoying
well.
because obviously in D&D, if you have an odd number, right, you're sort of wasting a point there, and I find that always happens with standard array. So that's why I prefer point buy.
Just so. Now, for those who don't know, point buy is 1 point for everything up until 13, and then after that point, every raise takes 2 points. Now, I've got about 5 points waiting on intelligence. I'm going to bump that up as far as I can. We should see that that reflects here. Yes. Now, I don't believe that's calculating keen mind or the feat I plan to take on for the 12th level. So I'm going to jump that down to 13 and we'll find that should increase later on. Perfect. So what are the other things we wanted to play up on? His health was poorly, but he was old in that instance. So we could say he sits at the ordinary person's level of health, where well, we're all guilty of it when we get older. We no longer want to go visit the hospital every other second week. And I can imagine with America's healthcare system being as expensive as it was, there are some justified reasons for that. Not making a commentary here, just stating the obvious. It is expensive in America's healthcare. Not a particularly strong man, so I'm going to leave that where it was. It wasn't particularly wise. So what I might do is a focused spread from dexterity and charisma as his secondary attributes. I'm going to raise that to 15, 14, sorry. So those are sitting a lot nicer. So with the dexterity, I don't imagine him being the sort of person who does parkour or great feats of acrobatics, especially not in his later years. But especially when innovating and crafting, I can see someone having a lot of fine motor skills involved with tinkering and precision with the hands. So that might play into a sleight of hand skill later on as well.
And you know, as a chronomancer, likewise, you can see the punches coming, right?
Just so, just so. So able to have some reaction. And so there I've spent all those points and we've got a decent stat array, which looks quite nice. It's average health, a little less wise than your average person, and not as strong as your average person, but by no means too far off the cusp. He's prone to the vices and guilts that we all are, I think, but definitely a more intellectual source. The charisma playing up into his time spent with celebrities and his ability to convince people to loan him money when really they shouldn't have. And
With the two nines you've got there, wouldn't it make sense to go for 8 on one strength and 10 on wisdom, so that you're only -1 0 rather than -1 -1?
that one's more of a role play choice where I want to play into his weaknesses as much as his strengths. So
Sure.
someone might
So
accuse
you're
it.
going for role play rather than the strongest
Yes,
build you can. That makes sense.
exactly. With his main casting stat being intelligence as well, I can safely ignore these other ones so long as I play my positioning well. And with chronomergy as a class being all about positioning and manipulating odds, I feel like I can get away with having some of those roleplay weaknesses. Now, for descriptions, we're not going to go too far into that, but what we are interested in is his background. Now, Tesla is Armenian born, and he had something of an accent throughout his life. And one of the stronger ways to reflect that is with Far Traveler. For those who don't know, Far Traveler is a background where it specifically calls you out on your strange manner of dress and your peculiar accent. And I think for a time traveler who's out of time and who's keeping his clothes from the 19th century, 20th century, pardon me, he definitely will stand out like a sore thumb. So I think I'm going to go with that one and see what sort of skills we get from it. Insight and perception, interesting picks. With his low wisdom stat, and this will bring it up to a slightly more reasonable level, but definitely not strengths that I'd lean into. But I will keep them just because there are some small elements that they can tie into the lore of it. Now, for tool proficiencies, we have musical instruments or cards or dice. And this is where my knowledge of Nikola Tesla falls short, as I'm not sure if he would have any particular skills with these, but something that all people can do, as we know since we're playing D&D, is pick up dice and roll them. So I'm happily give him some proficiency in that. And we're not going to worry about the characteristics or all eyes on you, as I'll be drawing from the main texts that talk about Tesla later on. So we go through that. Let's have a look at this character sheet now that we're all wrapped up. Just getting to enjoy it. So we're sitting at a nice score for intelligence, which we will be raising later on once I layer in the keen mind feat and the other intelligence related feat, which I haven't settled on yet. You can see that we have some nice features. Not much in the way of equipment though, and I think that plays in nicely to Tesla. He was, aside from the clothes he wore on his back and some of the items he made personally, he didn't really have a lot to his ends. So we might find that I add a quarterstaff later on, and we'll reskin it as a Tesla related themed item of some sort, like a lightning rod perhaps. And we've got our features and descriptions here. Interesting to note is arcane recovery, which will allow him to recover spells up to a certain level of combined spell slots once per long rest when he's doing a short rest. And I think that would be an interesting theme to pull from ongoing as we play, which is just this constant sense of him taking environmental phenomena from other places in time and then playing them into the scenario. So I'm intrigued to see how that all plays out when we come down to it. But otherwise, I think I'm quite satisfied with this man's spread of abilities. I might, since I mentioned his fine motor skills, I might eventually put one of his variant human skills from where it was in Arcana into sleight of hand, but for the moment, with Arcana being a pseudo stand-in for great technology, I'm happy with where that sits. So, I think I'm quite happy with that. Are you happy with that as well, Chris?
Yeah, mate, sounds good. Like I say, we can give him a lightning rod, rename it, make it cool. You can actually customize proficiencies, so you could rename Arcana as something else. Although as we go further and further back in time, I think it will be more likely we're encountering witchcraft and magic. So but yeah, I like the idea that in this world that they're the same thing, right? It'll be one stat for both.
Exactly. Well, I'm happy with that, and thank you for joining us for this little trek through our character creation process. I hope you've enjoyed it. Is there anything else we want to finish up with, Chris?
No, I'll just say, the spells I'll go for will all make sense. I think I'll have to go for some healing spells, and the way I'll roleplay that will be, but Byron's inspiring quotes. So he'll say lovely words to his team to bring them back to health.
Yeah, I like that. For spells for Tesla, I might pull from a bunch of different sources, and I'll do my best to try and work them into that time theme of having a machine of some sort or a device that's constantly malfunctioning and glitching or playing up. And I think that should tie in nicely to our low magic setting, but still giving me the capability to play out those mechanics.
Yeah, and the joy of having a glitching machine is that it sort of makes up for the fact that you have so many spells and that you never quite know what will happen, which I think will be fun. The only problem I envisage with that is you need to have both. It's fine renaming stuff and reskinning stuff, but the avid D&D fans will be curious actually what spell that was. So I wonder how we're going to maybe either show it on screen what the spell actually is, even if we say something different. It's something we need to have a think about, so that we can, if we rename a spell something, it can still be clear what we've just done.
I think an interesting play would be, and I hope listeners agree as well, is we could have the spells played out in their reskinned format during the game, and then after the game we could have a play-by-play where we can leave little trivia notes for people to read through if they are invested in looking beneath the engine.
Under the hood, yeah. Okay, brilliant. And I think also then that a fun audience participation would be to try and work out which quotes and which stories were actually real and which ones we'd made up on the fly about these amazing historical characters.
See just how well we can get into the heads of these larger-than-life figures from history.
Brilliant. Well, Jesse, thank you so much. That was really fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
I most certainly did, mate. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I look forward to the time we can jump into this epic history working title session and really see what sort of themes we can pull out from it, how it all works together.
Superb. Yeah, next week I think we'll do Blackbeard and Grace O'Malley, so two more characters in the party. And then we'll actually get started with a session 1.
Exciting times, mate. I can. I'm already a little nervous as we talk about it. Hands are shaking. Oh, I can't wait, mate.
Too much coffee. All right. Thank you very much, Jesse. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.